Here we're going to talk about incomplete contracts as the rule for exchange rather than the exception. So what we're going to be wanting to think about is what are the factors that lead to incomplete contracts being more common than complete contracts. We're going to highlight 5 reasons. We're going to number them 1 through 5 and we're going to explain each in turn. So let's look at those here. The first is the existence of asymmetric or non-verifiable information. What this means that third-party enforcement of contracts requires information that is available to both parties and can be verified by third parties in a costless way. That's very, very hard to achieve. Now, notice here what's important. It could be the case that we do not have asymmetric information. Both you and I know the quality of some good that we've had in an exchange. But if we cannot verify that with a third party in a costless way, then it doesn't matter if the information isn't asymmetric. We're going to have the same problems as if the information were symmetric. We're going to have an incomplete contract. Okay, so that's the first thing, asymmetric or non-verifiable information. Secondly, time. A complete contract must specify what the parties must do in every possible future point, or in every possible contingency or other state of the world. So in general, people cannot completely specify these states for every possible contingency in a contract. So think about this for yourself. Imagine you had to think to yourself, okay, if this, for every single aspect of a contract. That's incredibly hard to do. What that typically means is that a contract is not going to be able to specify what is going to happen in every possible state of the world, and therefore it's going to be incomplete. Next thing is measurability. Here the problem is that many goods and services involved in exchange between you and me or between various parties to exchange, they're very difficult to measure. And even when they can be measured, it's hard for us to describe them in a very precise way. Even if I can measure one thing, that doesn't mean that I'm able to measure everything that's important and relevant, right? So I can measure one thing, but that doesn't mean I can measure everything. So what we come down to here is that it's very hard to put these kind of measurement concepts into a contract. And when it's hard to measure whether someone has completed something or failed to complete something in a specific capacity, that means it's hard to have a complete contract that would specify what would be measured and what would be categorized and what would be bought and sold in that contract. Okay, 2 left. The fourth one is authority. For some transactions, there is no institution, no court or other relevant kind of third party that is capable of enforcing a contract. So imagine that we did actually have information that was verifiable. So no asymmetric information, and we did have verifiable information that we could hypothetically take to a third party. But then what happened? There was no third party to whom we could take this information to try to enforce the aspect of the contract that we have. This is something that has existed in, for example, problems in world trade, when especially poorer countries are trying to hold richer countries to account as a consequence of things that the richer countries have done in the poorer countries. Now, the World Trade Organization partly came to exist to try and solve such problems of lacking a third party to legislate and deal with such problems, the absence of a third party. But even it is not the best way of doing this. Similarly, think about the International Criminal Court in The Hague. It can only do so much. Now, that's between big countries where you can think of that pretty important people trying to create these institutions in the first place. Many other kinds of interactions, there isn't anyone willing to create and sustain an institution that would enforce contracts that would come to exist between different parties. The fifth is motivation. So this is an interesting one. What this comes down to is that sometimes what can happen is if you can completely specify what would happen in a contract, it actually might not be in your interest to do so. The reason being is that in certain kinds of contexts, the people who are within a contract may actually prefer to have an incomplete contract because that would favor trust, social norms, and reciprocity. Example of this is the use of incentives in the workplace, where sometimes the use of those incentives to try to elicit greater effort by workers can in fact backfire. This occurs because sometimes the use of those incentives, like monitoring technologies or invasive checking on what people do, that in fact reduces the effort that people exert. Even though these are incentives that can be specified in a contract that both the worker and the employer would know about, it's sometimes not in the employer's interests to use those tools that would make the contract more complete, because that actually might result in lower effort from workers. So, just as a reminder, these are the 5 factors that we looked at. We had asymmetrical non-verifiable information. We had time and the problems of specifying how contracts work over time and for every contingency or every state in the world. We specified measurability, the problem of trying to measure certain kinds of goods, the quality of different kinds of goods, the level of effort that people exert. All these kinds of things are difficult to measure. Not everything is like a commodity like number 2 red winter wheat. Importantly, we also have this problem of authority, that sometimes an authority does not exist that can enforce a contract. And finally, sometimes there are motivational reasons for us not want to complete the contract. In fact, it can actually be to our benefit not to specify what should happen in all states of the world for every possible contingency and with every use of incentives. Because of this possibility for improved motivation, where I trust you, you trust me, I don't monitor your every behavior, and you exert more effort as someone I work with.